People say that jealousy is a green-eyed monster. I'm not sure about the green-eyed part, but in my 22 years as a police detective in Moulton, I can definitely say that jealousy is indeed a monster, one with sharp teeth and a hideous set of ranking talons. I've seen jealousy lead to breakups, inventive property damage, public disturbances, and in rarer cases the most extreme of actions, like assault and even murder. Nothing boils the blood more, it seems, than the thought of another taking what's yours or encroaching upon your territory. Jealousy is a hell of a motivator, and in at least one case was the driving force behind a very nasty form of retribution. In that case, rather than being a monster, jealousy instead made one. At this point, I can be honest and say that I never liked Kyle Reeves. I had known his family and him for the better part of 20 years, and I honestly don't think in all that time he ever said a kind word to me. He wasn't particularly unkind either. He just had that sort of superior look down his nose at you kind of arrogance that made it impossible for him to consider you worthy of talking to or even approaching his level. When on occasion I had to take up court summons or inform him of law changes that were going to affect his practice, he accepted them as if I was a newspaper delivery boy, sometimes without a word, and looked at me as if I shouldn't really have been allowed on his property, never mind past the front desk. Reeves was a plastic surgeon of some renown, though he was not what you might refer to as your run-of-the-mill doctor. By operating on celebrities from the city, who in turn gave referrals to other celebrities, he eventually became something of a local celebrity himself. He had been on television many times, grinning with his impossible white teeth and chiseled jaw, talking about how a good plastic surgeon is the perfect fusion of left and right brain, because to be a good surgeon in aesthetics, you had to have not only the medical acumen and technical expertise to perform the surgery, but also the artistic flair to mold the flesh like a piece of molding clay and fashion it into something beautiful. It was, I remember him saying, the perfect marriage of science and art. Unfortunately, that was rumored to be the only perfect marriage that he ever experienced. Reeves' wife Madeline was an equally venomous creature. One of Dr. Reeves' first projects, her body bore all the hallmarks of his work. Weirdly, I always thought of Mrs. Reeves as something of a prototype. If Reeves was right in what he said about a plastic surgeon being an artist, then he definitely had a particular and distinguishable style. You could spot one of Reeves' women a mile off. The ski-slope nose, the puckered duck-bill lips, cat-like eyes, heart-shaped jaw, not to mention the bodily proportions which involved enhancement or reduction of curves in very particular places. It was as if, it often seemed to me, Reeves had bought a particular stencil when he was in medical college and had then proceeded to try and make every one of his clients fit into that particular shape. He definitely had a style. Problem was, he applied that style with greater and greater success as his career advanced and on younger and younger women. As you might imagine, a career not only working with beautiful women but molding them to his exact preferences and specifications visually was a recipe for some deep-seated jealousy in his wife. There had been stories in the media of Madeline being less than impressed by the special attention that Kyle paid to certain clients. The meetings after hours, the unscheduled appointments where no significant changes seemed to take place and no surgery was actually performed. Some of the more salacious tabloid newspapers had even snapped photographs of Madeline at award events and big events in the city and honed in upon the sideways glances and narrow-eyed looks she slung in the direction of some of her husband's clients during the moments in the spotlight. A number of times I was called by neighbors about screaming and what sounded like fighting within the Reeves family home, where Madeline had reportedly thrown crockery around like she was at a Greek wedding, making accusations about what Kyle had been up to with some of his clients. These incidents had never escalated into anything major, and by the time I knocked on their door to see what was going on, he was prepared with that same toothy grin and barely hidden sneer to tell me that everything was fine, though of course, it wasn't. When the jealousy really kicked into gear, however, was in 2004, when Allison Dumaine, a national celebrity, model, and TV soap actress, became one of Reeves' clients. In an interview broadcast across the region, Miss Domain, talking about her recent enhancements, made comments that seemed to insinuate that her surgeon liked her curves a little more than he should have, and had actually acted upon his admiration in a way that a married man absolutely should not have. Madeline, as you can imagine, was furious. It was around 3 months after the interview was broadcast that I got a call at the station around 3 a.m. from a woman screaming and blubbering into the receiver of a payphone. In her wild, panicked outburst, she blubbered something about kidnapping and about Madeline Reeves. Having worked out where the caller was, I sped out to the point and found Allison Dumaine, who I recognized immediately, cowering in the payphone booth, wrapped in a blanket and shivering. I picked her up, drove her to the station, and found her some clothes. After some time allowing her to settle her nerves, I got a story out of her. She had been sitting in a bar in the city when she noticed a woman watching her from a table opposite. The woman, Allison said, seemed to almost not blink. Instead, she just stared, never dropping her eyes when Allison looked back, but instead glaring with a sort of ferocious intensity, as if she wanted me to see her staring, to know that she had seen me and that she was watching. Eventually, it started freaking me out, so I got up and left. I was outside waiting for a cab when Allison paused and swallowed hard. She must have hit me or drugged me or something, because I don't remember anything after that. The next thing I remember is I woke up in Kyle's office. I recognized the place, and for a minute I thought I was dreaming. But when I came to, I was lying back in that chair he has, the one like a dentist chair where you get your lip fillers and Botox injections. I tried sitting up, but at first I couldn't move. I don't know what she gave me, but my head seemed to be awake, but my body was numb all over. I was like paralyzed. Then I looked up and saw that woman, the same woman standing over me. She had a surgical mask over her mouth and nose, and she was staring again, just sitting in a chair beside me, just the way Kyle does when he operates, and in front of her she had one of those metal trays, filled with instruments, scalpels and scissors and all kinds of things with hooks and horrible needle points. I was terrified. Every now and again, really slowly and deliberately, she would lift one and look at it as if checking her reflection in it. Then she would twirl it over and over in her fingers, looking down at me as if she was thinking of using it. It's weird, because she was wearing a mask, and she's had so much surgery it's like her face is fixed in one position. But I could tell, even under all of it, that she was smiling. She threw me a blanket, said, "Stay away from my husband, you filthy insect," and walked away. Of course, within an hour, I was at Kyle's house. He was away on business, and Miss Reeves made a dramatic fuss of being woken from her bed, where she said she'd been all night. I still took her in for questioning, but she stuck steadfast to her story, and her high-class lawyer, who was no doubt also expensive and paid for with Kyle's dollars, had me release her without charge pending further collection of evidence. Thing is, even from the first moment when Madeline had come to the door, her hair all mussed up, as if she'd been in bed, her face looked exactly as it always did, in a permanent, fixed mask that looked as if it had been painted on. I knew she had done exactly what Allison said she had. Call it a cop's instinct, but I knew she was guilty. What I didn't know was exactly what she had done. Allison's account only covered half of it. At first, I took the kidnapping incident to be some form of threat or warning, a way of telling Allison that if she wanted to, Madeline could get at her anytime she wanted to, and the next time the consequences would be far worse, and the instruments she had played with used on Allison's face and body. Aside from the trauma of having been kidnapped, Allison seemed fine, and physically at least, she seemed entirely undamaged, or so we thought. A week later, Allison went missing. She had been seen checking out of a hotel in the city. An attempt to check the security camera showed that every lens for almost 2 blocks had been tampered with, the wires cut, the lenses smashed. Whoever had tampered with them had planned for some time not to be seen. A week later, a video was uploaded to a dark website showing Allison Dumont tied to a chair in a nondescript and blank-looking room. The footage was a time-lapse, and in the corner a clock was whizzing past, hours and minutes rolling over far quicker than they should in reality as the camera, first in a wide angle, zoomed in on Allison's face as it erupted. At first, the swellings looked like acne, some kind of spots or boils, angry and red, with white top. But as time went by, they multiplied so that they were numerous, dozens and then scores. They grew, swelling and bloating into tiny conical volcano shapes from which things began to emerge. Maggots, thick and plump in the color of yogurt, wriggled and squirmed from the swollen pockets on the face as Allison screamed in horror and pain, and the time-lapse continued to turn. Hours, and then days. Eventually the maggots and worms began to burrow and feed, some turning into fully fledged flies circling around. Every now and again, a figure in a hood would enter the room, change the bag on the drip that was hooked to Allison's arm and which was clearly sustaining her as her face, pitted, pockmarked, and creeping all over with things that were bursting through her flesh, tore and bled. They covered her face like a mask, spilling and crawling around her lips, her nostrils, and the corners of her eyes. 2 days later, Allison Dumas had been found wandering by the side of the road just outside Moulton. Her face, hanging in tatters, had been completely destroyed. Once she had been picked up and taken to hospitals, the doctors confirmed that far from simply being a warning, the meeting with her kidnapper had been a very calculated attack, during which the eggs of various parasites, botflies, fluke worms, beef tapeworms, pork tapeworms, and hundreds of roundworms had been carefully injected into the skin of the face and even the eyeballs whilst the victim was unconscious. The injection marks in the creature's initial swellings had been undetected because of levels of plastic surgery Allison had already undergone. After a short incubation period, timed to coincide with her second abduction, these creatures had emerged, bursting through tears in the flesh and literally chewing their way out of her face, eating her alive and destroying the muscle and skin as if it were a piece of raw meat, scarring her life and rendering her almost unrecognizable. As for Madeline, she also disappeared a few days before the video was released, having taken the time to empty each of Kyle's bank accounts before she did. No one is sure where she escaped to, nor exactly how much money she made away with, though one would have to suspect it was enough for her to buy the services of a new surgeon and an entirely new face. Whether these operations will conceal the green in her eyes, only time will tell.